What if I tell you that there was a time in Europe when animals were dragged into courtrooms, put on trial like humans, and even executed for their so-called crimes? Yes, pigs, cows, goats, and even insects once faced the judgment of medieval law. In the strange theater of medieval justice, not only kings and peasants stood before the law. Sometimes the accused were pigs, goats, rats, even insects. Yes, in Europe during the Middle Ages, animals were dragged into courtrooms, tried as criminals, and punished as though they were human beings. Imagine the scene, a solemn church hall transformed into a courtroom. At the center stands the accused, a pig chained by the neck, squealing in confusion. Before it, judges in robes, lawyers with documents, priests invoking God's name. The charge, murder. The victim, a child trampled and bitten in a village field. Such cases were not rare. Historical records tell of cows hanged for killing peasants, roosters burned alive for laying eggs of the devil, and swarms of locusts solemnly excommunicated from entire towns. To medieval minds, every creature was part of God's order, and if a beast broke that order, it must face judgment. The trials followed procedure. Animals were assigned legal defenders, sometimes brilliant lawyers who argued passionately on their behalf. There are tales of attorneys pleading that their four-legged clients were innocent, only acting on instinct or even accusing careless owners for negligence. Yet often the verdict was grim. Executioners marched pigs to the gallows, cows were slaughtered, and dogs were stoned. Justice in the eyes of the medieval world was served. But the strangest of all were the insect trials. In one famous case, a town plagued by weevils sued them for destroying crops. The insects, of course, did not appear in court, yet their defenders argued that they too were God's creatures and had a right to live. After weeks of deliberation, the court declared the insects guilty, but granted them a small patch of land outside the town where they could feed. An absurd compromise between law and nature. Behind the absurdity lay something darker. These trials reflected the fear and superstition of an age when people saw God's hand, or the devil's, in every misfortune. A murdered child must have justice, even if the killer was only a pig. A ruined harvest must have a culprit, even if it was merely insects. The law stretched itself to absurd limits, because to admit chaos was to admit that the world was not under divine control. And so, centuries later, we look back at these trials as both tragic and comical, an echo of a world where justice was blind, but not always wise.